David sat on the edge of his small bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. It was just another boring school morning, or so he thought. He almost skipped school that day, just like he had last week, but something strange happened, something that had never happened before. A soft humming sound filled the room, and suddenly, a golden light appeared above his desk. A symbol floated in the air, a glowing alien crest spinning slowly. Then a voice, calm and smooth, echoed from the air. "David Miller of Earth, you are invited to represent your planet at the United Galactic Forum for Students." David blinked. Thinking it was a prank, he looked around the room, then reached up and tried to touch the symbol. His fingers passed through the light, but it didn't vanish. "Is this real?" he whispered. His little sister ran in, saw the light, and screamed. His mother dropped her cup of tea in the kitchen. Within minutes, news spread across the neighborhood. An alien invitation in David's room. Soon, government men in black suits came knocking on the door inside the government building. They scanned him, questioned him, and even tested his blood. But they found nothing strange, nothing alien. Only one thing was clear: the invitation was genuine, and no human had ever received one before. The United Galactic Forum was a place of legends. It was where young minds from all over the galaxy shared ideas. Aliens smarter than humans, taller, stronger, with strange skins and glowing eyes. They gathered every 10 years to select future leaders. And Earth had never been invited, not once. "Why me?" David asked the old man in charge of the Earth Space Authority. The old man only shrugged. "Maybe they want to laugh at us," he said. "Or maybe they're afraid of us." 2 weeks later, David stood at the spaceport, his backpack over his shoulder. The spaceship waiting for him was massive, smooth like silver water. Crowds watched from behind fences. Cameras flashed. His mother hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "Don't forget where you come from," she said. He nodded, heart beating fast. The ramp opened, and he walked inside, his legs shaking. A tall alien with green skin and no mouth nodded at him and showed him to a seat. David sat down quietly, surrounded by silence and glowing lights. As the ship rose into space, he looked out the window. Earth was getting smaller, and his journey had just begun. Inside the ship, alien students stared at him. Some whispered, in their own languages, others laughed openly. One alien boy with silver eyes said loudly, "Why bring a human here?" "They're still learning how to count." David didn't respond. He just clenched his fists. The journey took 3 days, and David barely spoke. He listened, observed, and kept to himself. But deep inside, he felt something grow, something like a fire. If they thought he was nothing, he would prove them wrong. Finally, they arrived. The Galactic Forum's Academy was floating in space like a city made of crystal. It had towers shaped like stars, bridges of glowing light, and flying platforms carrying students. It looked like a dream, too big, too perfect. The ramp lowered, and David stepped onto the glowing path. An announcement echoed, "Welcome, young minds of the galaxy." David walked forward, the only human. In a sea of alien colors, eyes followed him, some curious, some cold. He felt like an insect walking through giants. Inside the academy, everything looked strange. No chairs, no books, no blackboards. Learning happened through energy, through sound, through shared thoughts. David was given a translator, a small device he wore on his ear. It helped him understand the alien languages, but it couldn't hide their tone. One alien girl with horns giggled when he walked by. Another with feathers on her head pointed at his shoes and said, "Primitive." David kept walking, silent but burning inside. He didn't come here to fight, but if this was a test, he would not fail. In his room, which smelled like fresh metal, David unpacked his things. There was no bed, just a floating sleep pod. He sighed and climbed in, trying to get some rest. But he couldn't sleep, not after what he heard next. A voice from the hall said, "He doesn't belong here," another said. "Let him speak at the forum. He'll embarrass himself." David stared at the ceiling of his pod, his heart pounding. "They're planning something," he whispered. "They want me to speak. And just then, a message appeared on his wall screen. You have been selected to participate in the Galactic Speech Challenge. David sat up straight, eyes wide. A challenge where the galaxy's brightest spoke. Before the alien diplomats, and now, they had chosen a human for the first time ever. He didn't know if it was a joke or a trap, but one thing was clear. If they wanted a show, he would give them something they'd never forget. David didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. He kept staring at the glowing message on the wall, his heart racing like a drum. The Galactic Speech Challenge. Something only the top alien minds had ever dared to join. Now, a human boy had been picked to compete among them. And no one knew why. The next morning, the corridors of the academy buzzed with whispers. Alien students moved in groups, their eyes flashing toward David as he walked by. Some pointed, some laughed, some shook their heads. He heard the word Earthling so many times it started to echo in his brain like an insult. But he walked. Straight, shoulders back, eyes forward. He didn't come this far to break, not now. Not when the whole galaxy was watching. When he reached the central hall, the place looked like something from a dream. Dozens of floating platforms surrounded. A giant glowing orb in the middle. Each platform was a classroom, a training space, or a place to debate ideas with aliens from other worlds. David was shown to a small platform with a chair made of light and a screen floating in the air. A tall alien with silver arms and no face spoke to him through a voice device. You may train here, but don't waste our time, it said without emotion. Only one speaker will be chosen to present before the diplomats. David just nodded. Even though the message was clear, they didn't expect him to win. As he sat down, the training system activated. It showed him past speeches. From alien students confident, brilliant, cold, and perfect. They talked about technology, numbers, galactic trade, space laws, and power. But none of them talked about feelings, about pain, about hope. David listened carefully and began to understand something important. They had knowledge, but they didn't have stories. He started writing, scribbling on his tablet like his life depended on it. But no matter how hard he tried, the words didn't sound strong enough. His ideas felt small, his voice too weak. He closed his eyes and whispered, "What do I have that they don't?" A shadow passed behind him, soft and silent. He turned around and saw her Zira, the feathered alien girl he noticed on the ship. She stood there with her glowing eyes and tilted head, studying him like a puzzle. "You still writing that primitive human speech?" she said, but her tone wasn't cruel. It was curious. David looked up, unsure how to answer. "I'm trying," he said, "but maybe I don't belong here." Zira stepped closer and sat beside him, her feathers shimmering in the soft light. "You're the first human to ever be here," she said slowly. "That means something." He blinked, surprised. "No one else has said that," he replied. "Maybe they don't want to admit it," Zira whispered. "But they're scared of." "You? Scared?" David laughed. "Of me?" Zira nodded. "Because you're different. And different can be dangerous in a place that loves control." For the first time since he arrived, David felt something other than pressure. He felt seen. He showed Zira the beginning of his speech, and to his surprise, she read every word. She didn't laugh. She didn't mock. When she looked up, her face was serious. "Your words have emotion," she said. "It's not something we hear often here." That night, David rewrote his entire speech. He didn't talk about war or science or power. He talked about Earth, about his mother's hugs, about fear, about hunger, about dreams. He spoke of humanity's weakness and how those same weaknesses made them strong. And in every sentence, he added one thing: none of the others had heart. The next morning, the list of participants was posted on the wall of the Hall of Minds. Names from the strongest alien nations glowed with pride, and at the very bottom, barely readable, was his David Miller, planet Earth. The room went silent as aliens gathered around, reading the list. Then someone laughed, loud and sharp. "They're letting a human speak?" "What a joke," another voice added. He'll embarrass us all. We should ask for his removal. David heard it all, every word, but he didn't turn back. He didn't walk away. He just stood there, looking at his name, hands trembling but firm. Zyra walked up beside him and gave a small nod. "You ready to shock the galaxy?" she asked, her voice calm. David didn't smile, but his eyes were sharp now. "No," he said. "I'm ready to speak like a human." And when he turned to leave the hall, a few eyes followed him, not in laughter, but in silence. They didn't know what he would say, but they all felt it now deep down. Something was coming, and it wouldn't be like anything they had heard before. A fruit hit his chest and rolled to the floor. David stood still, heart pounding, while laughter echoed all around him. It came from a tall, red-scaled alien with 4 arms, who grinned and shouted, "Maybe this will remind you of your planet." Earthling, catch it next time. Others joined in, their sharp teeth flashing, their voices cold. David looked down at the strange purple fruit, sticky and soft. He could smell something bitter coming from it. Still, he didn't pick it up. He didn't shout back, he just looked around. Every alien in the training hall was watching him, waiting for a reaction. He gave them none. This was supposed to be the practice round for the Galactic Speech Challenge. Every student had been given 10 minutes to rehearse their speech in front of the others. But when it was David's turn, the room changed, chairs scraped, students stood up. A few even laughed before he spoke a single word. They didn't come to listen, they came to mock. He walked up to the circular platform in the center, the same one used by galactic royalty. Lights shifted above him, forming the galactic crest. Glowing like a second sun, David stood under it, small, alone, and very, very human. He cleared his throat, but his voice cracked on the first word. More laughter. He tried again, but the words felt dry in his mouth. He could feel sweat on his back, his legs shaking slightly. Was this how it ended? Humiliated before even speaking. Then he saw her, sitting silently in the back row. Zyra. She didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She nodded once, slowly, as if telling him, "Keep going." That tiny gesture hit him harder than any fruit could. David closed his eyes, breathed in, and remembered. He remembered the day his father lost his job. He remembered sitting with his little sister during a blackout, reading by candlelight. He remembered how they still smiled, still hoped, even when everything was broken. When he opened his eyes again, they looked different, steady, calm, ready. He looked at the crowd of aliens and said his first full sentence. And this time, no one laughed. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, soft and clear. He spoke only 3 lines before the timer ended, but it was enough. "I am David Miller, child of a world you call weak, but we survive every storm with empty hands and full hearts, and that makes us stronger than you think." The silence that followed was strange, not respectful, just confused, like they had heard something they didn't understand. Then the red-scaled alien clapped slowly, mockingly, and said, "So the monkey can speak." The rest followed, laughing louder now, trying to cover their discomfort. David walked off the stage with his head high. He didn't win them, not yet, but he had spoken, and they had heard him. That was a start. Later that night, David sat outside the practice dome under a dome of stars. The academy sky wasn't real, just a projection, but it looked beautiful. A cool wind passed through the artificial trees. He didn't move, just sat with his thoughts, playing his speech over and over in his mind. What could he do better? What words would strike the heart? He heard footsteps, soft and fast. Zyra sat beside him, her feathers ruffled by the wind. "You did better than expected," she said. "Is that a compliment?" He asked without smiling. "Almost," she replied. "But you still need more." "More what?" he asked, tired. "More you," she said. "You're trying to sound like us, when you should speak like a human." David looked up at the stars and thought about it. Speak like a human. But what did that really mean? He remembered his teacher once said, "Humans feel before they think. That's both our weakness and our strength." Maybe that was the key. The alien spoke with power and pride. Maybe he had to speak with truth and pain. The next day, David requested access to Earth's public memory library. He opened videos, sounds, and records from human history, old speeches, war broadcasts, love letters, cries for help, songs of peace, poems written by soldiers and children. He studied each one, slowly, carefully, like they were ancient weapons. He picked apart their rhythm, their meaning, their heart. He let those voices echo in his mind until they mixed with his own back. In his room, David erased his speech for the third time. He started over, but this time, he didn't think of aliens, he didn't think of winning. He thought of Earth, of people standing in line for food, of mothers rocking crying babies, of fathers building shelters from scraps, of laughter during war, of hope in broken places. He wrote until his fingers hurt, until his mind went silent and only his soul remained outside his door. Alien students passed by without speaking to him, but some slowed down, curious, wondering why the human hadn't quit yet. They had pushed him, mocked him, laughed at him, but he was still here, and now they started to wonder, why wasn't he afraid? The room was empty when David first spoke. No audience, no judge. Just the cold glow of the practice orb and his voice. He stood in the middle of the training dome, words shaking from his lips. His voice cracked halfway through, and the echo of his own fear filled the space like fog. Then silence swallowed everything. Even the lights dimmed slightly, as if the system itself had grown bored of him. He lowered his head, feeling the sting behind his eyes. This wasn't working. No matter how hard he tried, his voice always felt too small in this place, like he didn't belong to the world he was speaking into. A soft sound broke the silence, a door sliding open. David turned quickly, expecting another student ready to mock him. But instead, it was Zira, stepping in slowly, holding something in her hand, a small device. Glowing faint blue, she walked up without speaking and placed it in the center of the dome. Then she activated it, and the room changed. Suddenly, the practice orb transformed into a memory sphere. Images from Earth filled the air, old forests, burning cities, humans crying and dancing. Holding hands and holding guns, Zira stood quietly, watching the memories float around her. She looked at David and asked, "Are these your people?" David didn't answer with words. He simply nodded. Zira's feathers ruffled gently, as if touched by invisible wind. "I've seen many planets," she whispered, "but none like yours." "We're a mess," David said softly, "but sometimes we're beautiful." Zira gestured toward the center of the dome. "Now try again," she said, "but this time, don't just speak, feel." David stepped forward slowly, took a breath, and began. This time, his voice was different, not perfect, not polished, but real. He spoke of fire and flood, of war and forgiveness. He spoke of a child's laughter during a bombing, of two enemies helping each other survive a blizzard. He spoke of art drawn on ruined walls, and songs sung in hunger. He didn't try to impress. He didn't try to prove. He simply told the truth. Zira didn't move or blink while listening. When he finished, the dome went silent again. But it was a new kind of silence, one filled with weight, not emptiness. Then Zira said something David didn't expect. "My people have never cried," she said. "Until now." That night, Zira took David to a hidden part of the academy, a forgotten space between towers where the ancient architects once studied the soul. There, she showed him a wall filled with old symbols from dozens of species. One of them matched a design from Earth, a spiral drawn in ash. "No one ever knew what this meant," she said. "Now I think I do." David traced the spiral with his finger. "Pain, hope, rebirth," he said softly. "That's what it means for us." Zira looked at him, serious now. "There's a rule," she said. "The speaker who moves the hearts of the judges, not just their minds, wins." David turned to her, confused. "But no one's ever won like that," he said. "Exactly," Zira replied. "They think hearts are weaknesses, not weapons." She handed him a silver pendant, smooth and cold. "My mother gave this to me," she said. "She told me to give it to someone who sees the world differently." David hesitated, but took it. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Zira smiled, faint and tired. "Because I'm tired of perfect speeches that say nothing." As the day of the final speech drew closer, strange things started happening. David's schedule was changed. His speech times moved without warning. In one session, his words were erased from the practice files. Another time, his name vanished from the event list entirely. Someone was trying to push him out without leaving a mark. But every time he fell, Zira helped him back up, and every time they tried to silence him, he rewrote his words even stronger. On the night before the final event, David sat alone under the glowing trees near the Hall of Voices. He held the pendant in one hand, his speech notes in the other. A quiet wind moved through the leaves, whispering like an old story. He looked up at the stars, not real ones, but projections made by ancient machines. Still, they reminded him of home. "I'm not the strongest," he whispered. "I'm not the smartest, but I have something they don't." And as he said those words, the memory of Earth pulsed in his mind. Not just its pain, but its courage, its heart, its soul, the part that always refused to give up, even when the world was on fire. Tomorrow, he would stand before the greatest minds in the galaxy. He would speak, not as a warrior, not as a genius, but as something even rarer in this place, a human with a story. When David stepped onto the main platform, the air changed, not because the crowd respected him, but because they didn't. They leaned forward, not in curiosity but in doubt. He was the final speaker of the day, the last name on the list. To most, he was just a closing act before the real celebration began. Bright lights circled above the dome, casting strange shadows across his face. Alien students from all over the galaxy sat in tall seats, their eyes glowing. Above them, the highest seats were reserved for the Diplomats, leaders from 83 species. Some floated, some glowed. One had no body at all, only a robe and a whispering cloud inside it. And among them, staring cold and still, was the one who had lobbied against his inclusion, Ambassador Vexel of the Zalari Empire. No one clapped when David was introduced. The host simply said, "David Miller, representing Earth," and stepped aside. Silence followed, long and heavy. It felt like the entire galaxy was holding its breath, not out of excitement, but to see him fail. David stood still, eyes closed for a moment. His hands were shaking, but he didn't hide them. He let everyone see the fear, the weight, the raw nerves under his skin. Then he opened his eyes, looked up and began. "I don't have the biggest army," he said, voice quiet. "I don't have the fastest ships or the oldest wisdom or the brightest blood." No movement from the crowd, no reaction. But David kept going. "My people came from the dirt," he continued. "We were born under storms and fire. We were weak, soft, full of pain, and we failed again and again." Still silence. But now a few leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. Something in his tone was different. Something that didn't fit the usual pattern. David walked slowly across the platform, not standing stiff like the others had. He moved like a storyteller, like someone remembering. When we were hungry, we shared, even if it meant none of us ate enough. When we were afraid, we sang, even if our voices shook. When we were dying, we still reached out a hand, just in case someone else could live. A low murmur moved through the back rows. Some of the younger alien students glanced at each other, unsure how to react. No graphs, no equations, no military facts, just images, emotions, moments. David stopped near the edge of the stage, looked up at the Diplomats. "My world isn't perfect," he said. "It's loud and messy and full of mistakes, but we keep going because something inside us refuses to stop." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant. The one Zira gave him. He held it up where everyone could see. "This was given to me by someone who doesn't cry. And yet, my words made her weep, not because I was strong, but because I reminded her of something that was nearly lost. Now. The silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was tense, electric. Like the moment before a storm hits the ground. David took a slow breath and finished. You don't have to understand Earth to respect it. You only have to see that. We feel, we love, we fall, we rise, and maybe, just maybe. That's the kind of strength this galaxy needs right now. He stepped back, lowered his hands, and waited. No applause, no cheers, no response, only stillness. Then from the upper seats, a thin voice whispered, "Enough." The judges stood and floated away without a word. The rest of the audience remained seated, frozen in place. David walked off the stage with no celebration, no congratulations. Just the sound of his own footsteps against the glowing floor. Backstage, other students passed him with blank stares. Some whispered, some avoided eye contact. Zero was nowhere to be seen. Security bots floated past him without notice. It was as if his presence had become a strange question no one knew how to answer. He returned to his room, closed the door, and sat in silence. He didn't know what the judges thought. He didn't know if he'd won or lost. He only knew he had spoken the truth, without filters or fear. A soft knock came at his door. He opened it, expecting Zira. But instead, a tall ambassador stood there, one with a glowing forehead and robe made of starlight. "We need to talk," the ambassador said quietly. "Your words have started something." David's eyes widened, unsure what that meant. But before he could ask, more messages lit up on his wall, one after another, requests for meetings, for interviews, for explanations. Some came from planets he'd never even heard of, and behind all of it, a storm was building. A human voice had touched something deep in the galaxy's bones, and now change had already begun to stir. Asterisk. A cup shattered in the hands of the Zolari ambassador. Glass-like shards scattered across the marble floor of the council chamber. But the room remained silent. No one dared speak, not yet. "Replay it," Ambassador Vexel growled, voice like grinding metal. The screen in the middle of the room lit up again. David's face appeared, soft but steady, and his voice filled the hall for the second time. Across the galaxy, others were watching the same replay. On jungle-covered moons, underwater cities, dust-filled trade stations, alien leaders sat frozen as David's words echoed through their worlds. He hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened, hadn't begged. He had simply spoken like a human, and something about that stayed. It wouldn't go away. In a military research base on planet Karun, an admiral paused his war plan mid-sentence. His assistant said, "Should we continue?" The admiral didn't reply. He just replayed the speech again, slower this time, and quietly muttered, "How did he do that?" In the great temples of Lithra, where silence was considered sacred, priests gathered in confusion. He used no ancient language. One whispered, "But I felt it," said another, "in my blood." Back on the academy, David walked down the hall as if everything were normal. But it wasn't. Where once came laughter and whispers, now came only stares, not of hate, not anymore, but of something stranger, curiosity. Doors that had once been closed to him now opened without question. Even the elder instructors bowed their heads slightly when he passed, not out of respect but caution, because something had changed, and none of them knew what it meant yet. Zira appeared beside him one morning without warning. She looked tired, her feathers less bright than usual. "You made them feel something," she said quietly. "Some of them haven't felt anything in centuries." David sat with her under the glowing trees again. "I don't know what I started," he said. Zira nodded. "Neither do they. That's what scares them. But not everyone was afraid." On a far planet named Eridan, students gathered in the public square. They played David's speech on a loop. Some cried. Others held hands. One alien child whispered, "He speaks like my mother used to." Yet in the dark corners of the galaxy, powerful voices gathered in anger, in a secret chamber on the Empire's war moon. High-ranking leaders met in shadows. "This cannot be allowed," hissed one general. "A speech should not move armies." barked another. But even as they planned to erase it, the data had already spread, shared, copied, translated into 50 dialects. It was everywhere. Back at the academy, David was summoned again, this time not by a teacher or judge, but by the council of speakers. He entered a tall chamber where the walls shimmered like water. Inside, 13 figures sat on floating chairs, all from different worlds, old, wise, proud. One of them, a being made of swirling wind, spoke first. You are not a warrior, not a scientist, not a leader. Yet your words have shifted the thoughts of many. David stood tall but calm. I didn't mean to start anything, he said, but you did, said another speaker, a stone-skinned alien with glowing eyes. Your kind was considered primitive, soft, emotional. Now they are being watched. David waited, unsure what they wanted. Then the final speaker leaned forward, a pale creature with golden eyes and a long voice. You have caused disturbance, it said, but also possibility. After a long pause, the creature added, Earth has been granted a temporary seat at the diplomatic table. David blinked, unable to speak for a moment. You mean, we're in? Observed, the speaker corrected, not fully accepted yet. David returned to his room in silence. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the door. He sat down slowly, and for the first time since he arrived, he cried. Not because he was sad, but because something in him finally let go. He pulled up a message screen and typed one word to his family back on Earth. Listened. From that day forward, things changed. New students from Earth began arriving, alien. Instructors taught them differently, no longer ignoring, no longer mocking, but asking questions, real ones. David became a symbol, not just for Earth, but for something older. The idea that words, when spoken from the heart, can shift the stars. Zira sat beside him in the academy garden one last time before graduation. Still think your voice is small? She asked. David looked up at the false stars above and whispered, I think it's just beginning to grow. The first ship that descended over Earth's capital didn't come with weapons. It came with a question. Where is the boy who spoke for your world? The skies were filled with visitors, curious ones, nervous ones, and some who wore crowns of light. They had traveled across galaxies not for war, not for trade, but to understand a voice that had changed the silence of power. And standing on the rooftop of a government building, David watched them land, not as a student anymore, but as something no one expected. A bridge between stars. He had returned home weeks ago with no ceremony, no fireworks, just a quiet arrival and a family hug that lasted longer than words. But news had traveled faster than he had. By the time his feet touched Earth's soil, people already knew, not just that he spoke, but that the galaxy had listened. Reporters waited outside his house. Scientists called for interviews, governments requested advice, and poets whispered his name into their verses. But David avoided the spotlight. He didn't want to become a symbol. He just wanted to understand what came next. The knock came one morning, soft and steady. He opened the door to see Zira standing there, dressed in human clothes, slightly awkward but still proud. I told you I'd visit, she said, feathers flicking from under her hood. David smiled and stepped aside. Come in, he said. This time, I'll make you tea. They sat on the balcony, watching clouds roll over distant buildings. Zira sipped the bitter drink with a wrinkle of her nose. I don't get it, she said, but it's warm. David laughed quietly. I guess that's how they describe us too. Zira looked at the horizon, then back at him. The council voted again, she said. Earth is no longer under observation. David froze. You mean? Zira nodded. Earth is now a recognized voice in the Galactic Forum. With one seat. David leaned back, heart pounding, all the doubts, all the mockery, all the silence now replaced with one chair, one voice, equal to the oldest powers in space, and all because a scared boy didn't walk off the stage when the galaxy laughed. He turned to Zira. Who's going to fill that seat? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. You already have. That evening, Earth's first interstellar gathering took place in a quiet garden under the stars. Aliens from 6 worlds sat on curved benches made of wood and stone. No thrones. No weapons, no translation devices. Just voices and the desire to hear them. David didn't give another speech. He simply sat and listened, asked questions, told small stories of life on Earth rainy days, warm bread, games played in mud, and... As he spoke, the aliens leaned in, smiling gently, as if discovering something new. Not knowledge, but connection. One ambassador, tall and bright with skin like glass, finally said, "You humans feel everything too much." David nodded. "Yes, and maybe that's what the galaxy has been missing." When the night ended, Zira stayed behind while others left. She looked up at the stars above, the real ones this time. "I wonder," she said, "what happens if more of your kind start speaking?" David looked at her, thoughtful. "Then maybe the galaxy stops shouting and starts listening." Back in his room, David placed the silver pendant Zira gave him in a glass case. Next to it, he placed the fruit that once hit him in the training hall, now dried and harmless. 2 memories side by side, one of pain and one of possibility, both necessary. Letters from alien students began arriving days later. Some wanted to visit Earth. Others asked for help writing speeches of their own. One simply said, "Thank you for not staying silent." David never called himself a hero. He wasn't the strongest, the smartest, or the first. He was just a boy who stood up while others sat down, who spoke when it was easier to stay quiet, and in doing so, he did the one thing no weapon ever could. He changed the future with a voice. The galaxy, once cold and ancient, had cracked just enough to let something in. Not fear, not power, but empathy. And for the first time in its long, long life, the stars began to lean a little closer to Earth. Not to conquer, not to judge, but to listen.